The moment the cameras caught Yandy lowering her eyes, her voice trembling as she admitted to something no one expected, fans knew they were witnessing history in the making. This wasn't just another petty argument over social media posts or who followed who. This was a confession that sent shockwaves through the entire love and hip-hop community. For the first time on camera, Yandy acknowledged that she had formed an emotional bond with someone outside her marriage, and the room instantly froze. Gasps echoed, jaws dropped, and the tension was so thick it felt like time itself had stopped. Mendeecees sat back in his chair, his eyes wide but his face unreadable, before he leaned forward and delivered a line that cut deeper than any insult ever could. He called it worse than cheating. Those 4 words sent shivers through everyone watching, because they revealed not only his pain, but also the magnitude of what Yandy had just admitted. Emotional affairs are often unseen, but in that moment, every unspoken feeling became undeniable. The family was left divided, friends whispered behind their hands, and fans online erupted in disbelief. What did this mean for their future? And could their marriage ever recover from a wound this deep? The energy in the room was unlike anything anyone had felt before. The cast had witnessed countless arguments over money, loyalty, and social media, feuds. But this was different. This was raw, personal, and carried the weight of betrayal that words alone could never fully describe. When Yandy finally admitted that she had formed an emotional connection with someone else, it wasn't the kind of scandal fans could brush off as another storyline twist. It hit like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundation of her relationship. With Mendeecees, a relationship fans had watched endure prison time, public scrutiny, and endless rumors. The silence that followed her confession was almost unbearable. Everyone in the room looked around at each other, waiting to see how Mendeecees would respond. He leaned back slowly, his face tightening, his hands clasped together as though holding himself back from exploding. Then he said the words that left the entire circle stunned. Worse than cheating. It wasn't screamed, it wasn't thrown in anger. It was said with a calm finality that made it all the more painful. To him, physical cheating was one thing, but giving your heart, your emotions, to someone outside the marriage was unforgivable. Yandy's eyes widened and she tried to speak, but her voice cracked before she could explain. She said it hadn't been physical, that she had never crossed that line, but even as the words left, her lips, they did little to comfort her husband. He shook his head, muttering under his breath that love wasn't just about what happens in bed. It was about loyalty, about respect, about putting your partner above everyone else. Friends and castmates started murmuring in shock, some covering their mouths, others whispering furiously. One person gasped that she couldn't believe Yandy admitted it on camera, while another whispered that she respected her honesty but feared for the fallout. The producers exchanged nervous glances, already knowing that the scene would dominate. Headlines the moment it aired. Mendeecees finally turned to Yandy and asked her directly how long this emotional bond had been going on. The question was sharp, each word like a knife, and the room once again froze. Yandy hesitated, biting her lip, her hands twisting together nervously. She said it was during a period when they weren't connecting, when arguments had piled up and distance had grown between them. She insisted she never meant for it to happen, that it just started with conversations, with someone listening to her when she felt unheard. That explanation only seemed to enrage Mendeecees further. He slammed his hand against the table, not in violence, but in a burst of frustration. He said she should have come to him, that if she felt unheard, she should have spoken louder, not turned to someone else. His voice broke as he said he had always put her first, even when the world doubted him, even when he was locked away and fighting to hold their family together from behind bars. The cast sat in stunned silence, torn between sympathy for Yandy and loyalty to Mendeecees. Some argued quietly that emotional affairs can happen when people feel neglected, while others whispered that there was no excuse, that love should be stronger than temptation. Fans later echoed the same divide online, with half insisting Yandy had only done what many people secretly experience, while the other half condemned her for betraying the man who had stood by her through so much. Tears welled in Yandy's eyes, as she reached across the table trying to hold Mendeecees' hand, but he pulled away. The rejection hit her harder than any insult, her shoulders slumping as she realized the depth of the damage. She pleaded with him, saying she had never stopped loving him, that the connection outside their marriage was never stronger than what she felt for him. But her words seemed to bounce off him. his eyes filled with a coldness that fans had never seen before. As emotions boiled over, voices in the room began to rise. One friend demanded that everyone calm down, saying the conversation was spiraling. Another, however, urged Mendeecees to demand the full truth, insisting that if Yandy had admitted to this much, there might be more she was holding back. The tension grew unbearable, like a pot ready to spill over, and every second felt like it could be the breaking point. Mendeecees asked her bluntly if she had ever thought about leaving him for this other man. The question cut the air like glass, and everyone leaned in, waiting for her response. Yandy shook her head quickly, saying no, never, that it had been nothing more than an escape during a rough time. But her denial didn't erase the pain in his eyes. He pressed further, asking her if she still thought about that person, if she still had feelings. Her silence before answering was just long enough to send a wave of unease across the room. Finally, she whispered that she had moved on, that the bond had ended long ago, and that she was committed to making their marriage work. Her voice cracked as she said it, her tears falling freely now, but Mendeecees didn't move, didn't soften. He stared straight ahead, lost in thought, his mind racing through every moment he had trusted her, every time he had defended her against doubters. Friends started chiming in, trying to mediate. One castmate reminded Mendeecees that marriages survive worse, that if he truly loved her, he could find a way to forgive. Another argued the opposite, saying respect once broken is nearly impossible to repair, and that staying together after such a betrayal would only build resentment. The divide among the group mirrored the divide that was already beginning to form online, where fans debated whether Yandy's honesty was brave or reckless. Through it all, Yandy's sobs echoed, her voice rising in desperation. She begged him to understand that she had been lonely, that the bond wasn't about love, but about filling a void. She said she had chosen him, that she had stayed, that her life was with him and their children. But the more she spoke, the more it seemed like she was fighting not just for his forgiveness, but for the very survival of her family. Mendeecees finally looked at her, his voice calm but chilling. He said love without respect means nothing, and respect was what he felt she had thrown away. He said he could handle mistakes, he could handle flaws, but he couldn't handle his wife giving her heart to another man, even emotionally. The room went silent once more, everyone sensing that this was more than just an argument. It was the kind of wound that could define the rest of their relationship. Yandy lowered her head, her tears dripping onto her hands, while Mendeecees leaned back, his expression unreadable. The tension was suffocating, the silence deafening, and everyone knew this was only the beginning of a storm that would tear through their lives and leave nothing untouched. The room still buzzed with a mixture of shock and disbelief after Mendeecees' words sank in. It wasn't just that he felt betrayed, it was that he said it out loud in front of everyone, stripping away the thin veil of privacy they still had left. Worse than cheating. Those words replayed in the air like an echo, and you could almost see the ripple of emotion spreading through the group. Fans who had adored their story of resilience were suddenly confronted with a side of the couple they had never imagined seeing. Yandy wiped her tears, struggling to keep her voice steady. She told everyone that what she had with the other man was never real, that it was born out of loneliness when her marriage felt like it was breaking under the weight of distance, arguments, and constant pressure from the outside world. Her words poured out quickly, almost like she was trying to bury the truth under explanations. She insisted that Mendeecees had always been her one true love, and nothing had ever been able to replace that. But the more she spoke, the more defensive she sounded, and that defensiveness only made the room doubt her further. Mendeecees didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence, his heavy breathing, and the way his eyes fixed on her without blinking spoke volumes. When he finally did speak, his tone was measured but sharp enough to pierce through her explanation. He asked her how she could sit across from him and admit to building something emotional with another man while still claiming he was her one true love. "If I was your one true love," he said quietly, "why wasn't I enough?" The question hit like a dagger. Yandy froze, her eyes filling with tears again. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away once more, leaving her grasping at empty air. The rest of the cast looked on, caught between pity and judgment. Some shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned in, eager to catch every word of the unraveling. Sierra, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up, her voice dripping with judgment. She said what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say. That emotional cheating was often worse than physical, because it meant the heart had strayed. The body might be weak, she said, but when the heart goes wandering, that's when the real damage is done. Her words caused murmurs across the room, some nodding in agreement, others whispering that she was only stirring the pot further. Yandy snapped back, her voice cracking with anger. She told Sierra to stay out of her marriage, that she had no right to throw fuel on the fire. But Sierra didn't back down. She leaned forward and told Yandy that by admitting it herself, she had already thrown the fuel, and now everyone was just watching the flames rise higher. The argument spiraled quickly. Voices overlapped. Friends jumped in to defend one side, or the other, and producers tried to calm the chaos but failed miserably. One friend shouted that Yandy's honesty should be respected, that most people would have hidden such a secret forever. Another argued back that honesty doesn't erase betrayal, that some truths are too destructive to ever be forgiven. While the room erupted, Mendeecees sat still, his hands folded tightly, his face a mask of pain. He finally raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise. He told everyone to stop, that this was between him and his wife. The room went quiet instantly, the weight of his authority reminding everyone that this wasn't just a storyline. It was his life. He turned to Yandy and asked her if she still thought about the man she had bonded with. The silence that followed was suffocating. Yandy stuttered, her lips trembling, before finally whispering that she had moved past it. But the hesitation was long enough to spark doubt, not only in him, but in everyone else watching. The tension thickened as another castmate muttered under their breath that hesitation meant guilt. Yandy heard it and immediately broke down, shouting that she was being cornered, that no matter what she said, no one would believe her. She cried that she was trying to be honest for once, that she wanted to clear the air and not hide in shame anymore, but instead of forgiveness, she was being attacked. Her cries echoed off the walls, raw and desperate, and some of her closest friends rushed to her side to console her. Fans watching later would say that moment was one of the rawest in love and hip-hop history. It wasn't about stage drama or exaggerated feuds. It was about a woman breaking down under the weight of her own truth. The internet lit up instantly, some calling her brave, others calling her reckless. Hashtags exploded with phrases like "worse than cheating" and "Yandy admits" trending within minutes. As Yandy sobbed, Mendeecees stood and paced back and forth, running his hands over his head in frustration. He said he wasn't sure if he could trust her again, that every time he looked at her now, he would wonder who else she had leaned on when things got tough. "I gave you everything," he said through clenched teeth. "I fought for us when people said we wouldn't last, and you still found comfort in somebody else." Yandy tried to explain that it was never about replacing him, that it was about feeling seen in a moment when she felt invisible. She begged him to understand that it wasn't love, it wasn't lust. It was just a temporary escape from loneliness. But to Mendeecees, those words were no comfort. He told her that being invisible, to her, was the greatest betrayal of all, because he had always seen her, even when the world didn't. The emotions in the room grew unbearable again. One friend walked out, saying they couldn't take watching this unfold. Another castmate whispered to someone else that this could be the end of Yandy and Mendeecees, as everyone knew them. Even the producers, who usually thrived on drama, looked concerned about how far things had gone. As the night dragged on, the argument slowed, but the tension didn't ease. Mendeecees sat back down, his face buried in his hands, while Yandy cried quietly beside him. They were two people sitting inches apart but separated by miles of mistrust and heartbreak. The silence between them was louder than any shouting could ever be. And everyone knew that no matter what happened next, their marriage had been forever changed. And just when it felt like the night couldn't get any heavier, a new voice broke through the quiet. A close friend of the couple revealed that they had seen messages months ago, messages that suggested the emotional bond might have been deeper than Yandy had admitted. The revelation dropped like another bomb, reigniting the chaos and leaving everyone in the room gasping, wondering just how deep this emotional affair truly went. Gasps filled the room when that friend claimed to have seen messages. It was one thing to hear Yandy admit an emotional connection, but to hear someone else confirm they had seen written proof added another layer of disbelief. Yandy's eyes widened, her hands shooting up defensively as she shook her head. "That's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice breaking. But the damage was already done. Whispers rippled through the circle like shockwaves, each person reacting with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Mendeecees' face hardened as he stared at his wife. The disbelief in his eyes cut her deeper than any insult could. "Messages?" he repeated slowly, his tone heavy with pain. "So you were talking to him? All that time you were telling me nothing was going on? You were still writing to him?" His words carried quiet fury, the kind that comes from betrayal that feels too heavy to process all at once. Yandy tried to explain that the messages were innocent, that they were conversations about life, struggles, and nothing romantic. But no one seemed convinced. Sierra smirked in the corner, whispering to another castmate that innocent was always the excuse people used when they got caught. The room was thick with tension, everyone leaning in, unable to look away. Tears streamed down Yandy's face as she defended herself. "I was lonely," she cried, her voice trembling. "I needed someone to listen, someone to just hear me when I felt like my own husband wasn't. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about surviving a moment I didn't think I could get through." Her confession drew mixed reactions. Some friends nodded in sympathy, understanding the pain of loneliness. Others shook their heads, whispering that it was still crossing a line. Mendeecees rose from his chair, pacing the room as though trying to walk off the storm raging inside him. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them, clearly fighting to stay in control. "Do you know how stupid I look right now?" he asked, his voice sharp but low. "Years defending you, standing up for you when the world had something to say, and you're telling me you were pouring your heart out to another man behind my back." Yandy sobbed louder, begging him to understand that it had ended, that it was in the past, that she was here with him now. She reached for him again, but he stepped away, his body language screaming of the distance that words could no longer bridge. The other castmates watched, torn between loyalty and shock. One friend finally stepped forward, telling Mendeecees that walking away now could destroy everything they had built, that couples go through storms but love survives if you fight for it. Another immediately countered, saying that emotional betrayal was like poison. It seeps in slowly but kills completely if left unchecked. Sierra leaned in again, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He said it himself," she reminded everyone. "This is worse than cheating. You gave your heart to someone else, Yandy. How do you come back from that?" Her words stung like salt in an open wound. Yandy snapped back, screaming that Sierra was obsessed with tearing her down. Her voice cracked as she shouted that Sierra didn't care about truth, she just cared about destroying reputations. But the more she defended herself, the more the room wondered if there was still more to the story. Had the bond really ended, or was there something deeper she hadn't revealed? The silence that followed each of her hesitations was louder than anything else. Mendeecees sat down heavily, rubbing his face with both hands. He said he didn't know if he could forgive her, that the thought of her confiding in another man, laughing at his jokes, sharing her fears, was something that would haunt him forever. "You don't understand," he told her. "Physical is one thing, but emotional? That means you trusted him with parts of you that belong to me." The rawness of his words left the room shaken. One friend started to cry quietly in the corner, moved by the pain that hung heavy in the air. Another shook their head and muttered that this marriage might be over. The sense of finality lingered, but Yandy refused to accept it. She stood, her voice rising as she poured her heart out. She admitted that, yes, she had slipped. That yes, she had leaned on someone else when she should have leaned on her husband. But she insisted it had never been love, never been something real. Just a fleeting connection during a time when she felt abandoned. She swore that her family was everything to her, that Mendeecees was the love of her life, and that she would do anything to prove it. Anything to prove it. Her raw plea brought a hush over the room. Even Sierra stayed quiet, watching intently as Yandy fell to her knees in front of her husband, clutching his hands despite his attempts to pull away. She begged him not to let this mistake erase the years they had fought for each other, the children they were raising, the legacy they were building. Mendeecees' face softened just slightly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He told her he didn't want to give up, but he didn't know how to move forward with the doubt clouding his heart. "Every time you smile at me," he said, "I'll wonder if you smiled that way at him. Every time you tell me you love me, I'll wonder if you said those words to him too." His honesty cut through her like a blade, leaving her sobbing harder than before. The cast, visibly moved, began trying to mediate again. One suggested therapy, another suggested time apart, to heal, while another bluntly said the damage was too deep, and they needed to face the reality that sometimes love isn't enough. The divide among the group mirrored the divide among fans online, who were already battling in comment sections about whether Mendeecees should forgive or walk away. Just when it seemed the night couldn't get any heavier, another revelation surfaced. One castmate hesitated, then admitted they had once overheard Yandy on a phone call late at night, her voice low and tender, speaking in a way that didn't sound like casual friendship. The admission dropped like another bomb, reigniting the chaos. Voices rose again, arguments flared, and the tension reached a fever pitch. Mendeecees looked at Yandy, his face pale with disbelief. "Was that him?" he asked, his voice trembling, now more broken than angry. Yandy shook her head violently, insisting it wasn't what it seemed, but the cracks in her voice, the panic in her tone, only deepened the suspicion. The night spiraled further into chaos, with emotions running high and accusations flying from every corner. Yandy clung to her story, begging for understanding, while Mendeecees sat torn between the love he still felt and the betrayal he couldn't shake. The family was left divided. Friends questioned their loyalty, and fans across the world wondered if this was the end of one of love and hip-hop's most iconic couples. And as the shouting finally began to die down, the silence that followed was heavier than ever, leaving everyone in the room bracing for the next revelation that could shatter what little remained of their trust. The room had grown quiet, but the silence didn't bring peace. It was the kind of silence that weighed on everyone's chest, the aftermath of too many words that could never be taken back. Mendeecees sat with his head in his hands, motionless, while Yandy knelt close to him, her tears leaving dark marks on the floor. Around them, friends and castmates shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should step in or let the couple face the storm on their own. One producer whispered nervously that the cameras had captured enough, but no one dared to stop filming. The drama unfolding was too raw, too real, and too explosive to cut short. Fans had wanted authenticity, and now they were getting it in the most brutal way possible. Yandy finally found her voice again. Her tone was softer now, filled with desperation, rather than defense. She told Mendeecees that she had never wanted to hurt him, that every word she had said earlier came from a place of guilt rather than love for anyone else. She admitted she had been selfish, that she had let her emotions cloud her judgment, but she swore her heart had always belonged to him. Her voice cracked as she begged him to look at her, to see her not as the woman who slipped, but as the woman who had stood by him through every trial. Mendeecees finally lifted his head, his eyes red and tired. He looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but heavy with sorrow. "You don't understand what you've done," he said quietly. "You gave another man a part of you that was supposed to be mine. It doesn't matter if it was physical or not. Respect is gone, and without respect, love doesn't survive." His words hit like another blow, and Yandy broke down again. She clutched at his arm, repeating over and over that she would do whatever it took to rebuild that respect. She swore she would prove to him that her loyalty hadn't wavered, that her mistake didn't define her. But for every word she said, his expression stayed unreadable, a mask of pain that refused to crack. Others in the room couldn't hold back any longer. One castmate stood and told Mendeecees he was right to feel betrayed, but also reminded him that everyone makes mistakes, even the strongest couples. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting," she said. "It's about deciding if love is worth more than the pain." Another shook their head and countered, saying that forgiving an emotional affair was like trying to rebuild a house on broken glass. It might look sturdy for a while, but sooner or later, the cracks would tear it apart. Sierra, always ready to add fuel to the fire, leaned forward again. She said what no one else dared to. "Maybe this is the end. Maybe Yandy's already shown you who she really is." Her words cut through the fragile silence like knives, and Yandy spun around to glare at her. Her voice was sharp with fury, now shouting that Sierra had no right to speak on her marriage, No right to use her pain as entertainment. The two women exchanged a flurry of heated words, their voices rising until others had to step in to pull them apart. Fans later would say that moment alone could have been an entire episode. The raw confrontation between two women who had never trusted each other exploding at the worst possible time. On social media, the clips would circulate endlessly, captions like "Yandy versus Sierra explodes" and "worse than cheating fallout" dominating feeds for weeks. Back inside, Mendeecees stood up once more, trying to end the chaos. His voice carried authority, but it was laced with exhaustion. He told everyone he needed space, that this wasn't something that could be solved in a single night, and that no amount of shouting would erase what had been said. He told Yandy directly that he wasn't walking away just yet, but he also wasn't ready to forgive. "I need to think," he said simply, his tone final. Yandy reached for him again, pleading with him not to leave the house, not to shut her out. Her words tumbled out desperately. "We built too much. We've come too far. Please don't give up on me now." Her voice cracked again, and tears blurred her vision, but Mendeecees only shook his head. He told her he wasn't giving up. He just wasn't sure if they could ever go back to what they had before. As he walked toward the door, the cast watched in silence. Every step he took felt like a nail in the coffin of their marriage, and Yandy's sobs filled the room behind him. She called his name, but he didn't turn back. The door closed softly, leaving her on her knees, broken in front of everyone. The atmosphere was unbearable. One friend rushed to Yandy's side, wrapping their arms around her as she cried uncontrollably. Another muttered under their breath that love and hip-hop had never seen a moment like this before, that the rawness of the confession and fallout would change the entire season. Yandy eventually lifted her head, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady again. She told everyone she wasn't going to let this be the end. She swore she would fight for her marriage, fight for her family, and prove to the world that one mistake didn't erase years of loyalty. Her determination shone through her heartbreak, and for the first time all night, some of the people around her began to nod in support. But the question lingered. Could she win back Mendeecees' trust, or had the damage already gone too deep? Fans watching from the outside would debate endlessly, dividing themselves into camps, some saying she deserved forgiveness, others insisting she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The comments, the memes, the hashtags, it was all proof that this moment would live far beyond the night it happened. As the cameras finally shut off, the cast left in small groups, still whispering about what they had witnessed. Some shook their heads, saying they couldn't believe Yandy had admitted it on camera. Others muttered that maybe her honesty would save her in the long run, that owning her mistake might be the only way forward. But everyone agreed on one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again for Yandy and Mendeecees. Yandy sat alone long after everyone left, her tears finally drying, replaced by a determined stare. She whispered to herself that she would not let this be the end of her story, that she would prove her love, no matter how broken things felt tonight. And as the night gave way to morning, the weight of what had happened lingered heavy in the air, leaving everyone who had witnessed it wondering if love could survive when trust had been shattered so completely. And so, after everything that played out, one thing is certain. This emotional confession has changed the story forever. Yandy admitting to an emotional connection, while Mendeecees declared it worse than cheating, has left their family divided, their friends stunned, and fans across the world in shock. The questions are piling up faster than the answers. Can a marriage survive when respect is broken? Is an emotional affair really more damaging than a physical one? Or is this just another storm they will find a way to weather together? Social media is already exploding, with some defending Yandy for her honesty, while others say Mendeecees should never forgive. The drama doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling, and the fallout from this night will haunt every corner of their lives for a long time to come.